Good tidings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Lousy podcast. Before we launch this episode, we have some special people we need to thank, those special people being the sages of the lodge, those who donate monthly to keep the lodge moving. If you'd like to become a sage of the lodge by donating as little as $1 a month, you can find a link in the episode description, be it whether it's on YouTube or any of the audio platforms. So, thank you to everybody, thank you to the Sages of the Lodge, and thank you for tuning in. And without further ado, let's get on with it. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Lousy Lodge, all of you beautiful sickos and normies. Today's episode, we're going to be talking about the highly anticipated sequel that dropped earlier this year, Persona 5 Strikers. But before we get into any of that, I want to thank not only you, the viewer, but the Sages of the Lodge for their continued support. I've been on vacation the last few weeks, so the content drip has been a little bit slower, but thank you everybody for bearing with me. I'll be sure to be pumping out some new podcast episodes, new streams, and we've got a new Hero's Journey video coming up, but all that we'll save for when the time comes. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we are talking about, I should show you the real box art for those of you watching, those listening, just showing the box art to the lovely viewers on YouTube, Persona 5 Strikers. Now, me personally, Persona 5 Royal in specific, and here's a shot of the steelbook, if anybody wants to see what the steelbook looked like. But Persona 5 Royal was easily one of my favorite games of all time. I'd even go so far as to say it might be my favorite game of all time. That opinion is always fluctuating, but needless to say, I adored Persona 5 Royal. I think it's one of the greatest games ever created, and that's bad news for Persona 5 Strikers, because that means there's a lot of hype to live up to. There's a high bar to surpass. So now the ultimate question, Persona 5 Strikers, worthy sequel or lousy spin-off? Now, I'm going to probably answer this question about halfway through the podcast. I want to let all of you know that the first 25 minutes of this video are going to be spoiler-free. So if you're just looking to get a general idea of what you can expect, this podcast is for you. If you're looking for some of those sweet spoilers, you're going to have to wait till the end of the video. Let me lay out how I plan on doing this. First things first, we're going to do direct comparisons to Persona 5 Royal. Now, some people may not think that's fair, but if you're going to be the sequel to a game, you kind of can't avoid this sort of thing. So the video is going to start, we're going to do direct comparisons with Persona 5 Royal, then we're going to go piece by piece, the combat, the music, side quest, story, characters, piece by piece and review them. I'll discuss some of the characters, my favorite things about them in this particular installment, and then we're going to round it out with a big final score. All right, so let's get started. I'm just going to come out and say it. I don't think there's anything this game does better than Persona 5 Royal. However, I did enjoy the game very thoroughly. I really thought it was a great game. It was a great mix-up. It does a good job of feeling similar to Persona 5, but at the same time feeling very different from Persona 5. So, let's just start with the combat, right? So the combat is probably the thing that was the most different. In Persona 5, you had nice turn-based combat, and here in Persona 5 Strikers, you're looking at more action-based combat, obviously resembling that of the Warriors games. I have to commend them, actually. I wasn't sure how they were going to pull this off, or if it was going to feel seamless or feel like it belonged in the Persona 5 universe, but the combat was actually very good. I was pleasantly surprised. I thought it was playing as every character felt unique, and all their different sorts of movesets and special attacks really made you feel like you were wielding a different character and not just like a clone or a different skin or like a copy and paste from somebody else's moveset. So they did a very good job making every character feel very different to play. Personally, I do prefer, even though I usually prefer action-based combats, I felt that Persona 5's combat was actually superior to Persona 5 Strikers' combat. However, that doesn't take away from how much fun it was to play the Strikers' combat, because I'll say this, even though I feel like Persona 5's combat altogether was better, when it comes to Strikers, one of the things that I loved was that you really need to play as every single character, and that you will be kicking yourself if you get to the end of the game and all your characters are not leveled up. So let that be a warning to anyone who hasn't played it yet. I really enjoy those sorts of things. I'd like to see RPGs move into an era where every character, in a sense, becomes mandatory, as opposed to, say, the RPGs of old, where you spend the game, you unlock 10 characters, but you keep the same 3 or 4 in your party. Where's the fun in that? Strikers does a really good job of making every single character feel important and every single character worth playing as. Like me personally, in Persona 5 Royal, I never wanted Morgana in my party. But in Persona 5 Strikers, Morgana was one of my favorite characters to have in the party. And we'll get into it in a little bit later when we start talking about the characters specifically. But another thing this game did really well was it helped a lot of characters really shine who maybe had to take a back seat in Persona 5 Royal. But rounding out the combat, I thought it was very smooth. I thought it was intuitive. It was fun. That's the biggest thing, right? It was fun. Fun to play the kind of, like, you didn't dread walking into battles. You didn't dread having to fight the baddies along the way. It felt good. It felt smooth. The Showtime moves were fun. One complaint I guess I'll have is, they were able to do these Showtime moves. I wish there could have been some of those, like, team-up Showtimes, like they sort of had in Persona 5 Royal, where the two characters came together to do a special move, as opposed to here, where everyone kind of has their individual. But that's neither here nor there. Let's move on to the music. Now, Atlus is quickly turning into one of those companies where no matter what game they release, I'm never concerned about the music. I feel very similar about Square Enix, where no matter what the game is, whether it's a flagship title or a spin-off, Atlus goes balls to the walls on their soundtrack. And I'll say, out of all the different categories we're going to discuss today, if you could make a case for one of these categories being in Striker's favors, I would actually say it's the music. I love the music. The music's a 10 out of 10 in both games, if you ask me. Just some of the remixes in Strikers are just so out of this world. And the fact that every time you fight a battle, it's a different song keeps the game feeling fresh. This way you don't feel like you're listening to the same thing over and over and over and over again. So all in all, I really, really love the soundtrack of this game. To me, it's the one category where it might beat its predecessor. Let's talk about side quests and sort of the world exploration aspect of this. This is where I feel like the game really falls short. I understand that this was supposed to be a sequel spin-off, right? It wasn't supposed to be a tried and true Persona game or resemble Shin Megami Tensei in any way or anything like that. It was a spin-off made by the Warriors team. However, if the goal was to make it seamless, they really messed up here, and I'll tell you why. No confidant system. And that was really, really disappointing to me. Now, I know there were side quests that you could do with all the different Phantom Thieves, and you could, you unlock cool little cutscenes with them, or you get cool little lines of dialogue from them, and that's all well and good. It's there at a base level. But I thought they could have slipped in a confidant system, much like they did in Persona 5 Royal. It's, in my opinion, the best social system I've seen in any game. It is an amazing way to get to know the characters. It is an amazing way to flesh out the characters and their own particular stories and their own particular character arcs. I was really upset because literally that's probably one of, if not my favorite aspect of the Persona series. Now, given I've only played Persona 4 and Persona 5, don't hate me now, we'll make our way to Persona 3. But the confidant system, the social link system, as they call it in Persona 4, that's some of my favorite stuff. And for them not to include this in a game that's supposed to be a sequel to Persona 5, I'm sorry, I thought it was criminal. Now, it doesn't ruin the game for me by any means. Like I said, I enjoyed this game. I really, really enjoyed my playthrough. But I think the game could have gone to another level if they had a confidant system. Look, that's just my personal take. I never really felt encouraged or enticed to explore the world outside the main plot. Every city I went to, I would do a side quest or two, but that was just for, I guess, good measure. I never felt that need to like, I gotta explore all of this. I could be missing all these amazing golden nuggets. As opposed to Persona 5 Royal, where it's like every character I ever met, I wanted to max out their confidant. I wanted to know what was going on with them. I wanted to know their story, man. I wanted to know what they were going through. I wanted to know how they could play a part in helping the Phantom Thieves. Like, it was all there. You could meet some bum-ass politician on the street, and you want to know everything about him. You want to flesh out his confidant system. I just felt like that was really missing here, and I think it would have really brought this game to another level if they even had a mini confidant system. You don't need 10 stars, could do 5. Just my opinion. I think when it comes to side quests and sort of the world exploration, city exploration, Persona 5 Royal takes the cake. However, I will give Persona 5 Strikers credit. It was really, really cool going to different cities, every different jail, which jails are palaces, for those who may not have played the game yet. Instead of exploring palaces, you explore jails, and it was awesome going from city to city to city and taking that road trip with the Phantom Thieves. So while they both did pretty well in this regard, the fact that Strikers did not have a confidant system, to me, is criminal. And I think if they were ever going to do a spin-off like this again, the confidant system would have to be mandatory. All right, so let's talk about the overarching plot. Now, how do I put this? I really, really enjoyed it, but it was very similar to Persona 5 Royal in regards to its tropes and what to expect and the twists and the turns. And again, you could say the same thing about 5 to 4. You know, they like to follow a lot of those same formulas. Persona 5 Strikers followed a similar like plot formula. You had a lot of the same, like I'd mentioned, you had a lot of the same tropes there. But outside of the, for lack of a better term, redundancy, the story was very, very good. Legitimately one of the better stories I've played in gaming over the last couple years. It wasn't anything crazy. What I really liked is it wasn't trying to outdo Persona 5. It wasn't trying to outdo it. It wasn't trying to be bigger and better and higher stakes. It was just like, hey, there's shit going down and the Phantom Thieves have got to handle it. Doesn't matter if it's bigger or smaller than Yaldabaoth and everything going on in Persona 5. Didn't matter. This was just something else that needed to be handled, and I thought it was done very well. I think there are a lot of things that are unique to this story, even though there is that little bit of redundancy. But, you know, there's something that these games do very well. And here's something I'll say about Persona 5 Strikers in general. The Persona charm really, really is all there. Whether you have the way the music syncs up with the world and the battles, or the way you have these character interactions, or how these characters grow, it's all there. You end up falling in love with the world. You end up falling in love with the characters. They really do a terrific job. The Persona charm is all there. Now, with that said, the story wasn't anything mind-blowing. I wouldn't say it's my favorite Persona story, but if you're looking for that Persona charm with those RPG tropes, it's all there for you. Again, I'm trying to keep this as spoiler-free as I can right now. We'll get more into it at the later end of this video, but broadly speaking, this game's story is very solid. But now, let's move on to the fun part. The fun part is the characters. Now, I don't know how many Persona fans out there are listening to this, or whether or not you'd agree with this assessment, but the characters are the best part. In my opinion, there's no contest. The characters are the most fun thing about these games. And I think one thing Strikers had the advantage of when it came to their characters is that, you know, Persona 5 itself, it has to spend a lot of time setting all these characters up, right? Like when you meet Ryuji and Ann and Morgana, and you got to flesh them out, who they are, where they're from. You have to flesh all this out. Haru, Makoto, every character. You meet them for the first time, and you have to spend a lot of time setting them up, fleshing them out, building them up. The advantage that Strikers has is that all these characters have already been built. So now we don't have to worry about everyone getting to know everyone. What we can do now is take all these characters who already know each other and just let them spend time together. And that was one of the coolest things about this game, was just that feeling of being on the road trip with your friends, posting up, eating lunch, hanging out, talking. It really felt like you were on the journey with the Phantom Thieves, and seeing them all be friends, like they're reunited. again after being separate for most of the summer, and they've come back together, and it just feels so wholesome, and it feels so right, and it's all there. Like, it all clicks, and there's not, they don't have to force any of it. Like, all the interactions are completely genuine and are just heartwarming and hilarious. However, while we have characters on our mind, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about every character, at least the most notable ones, and just give my quick thoughts on how I felt they were handled in this game. But I wouldn't be honest if I didn't lay out what was disappointing for me. And let's see. I mean, I said I was going to wait for the 20-minute mark. I've got some soft spoilers that I'm about to drop, so if you're trying to avoid any and all spoilers, go ahead and get out. Here's my soft spoiler, and I have to bring it up because this was something that hurt. No Akechi. No Sumire. Come on. Come on. Those are two of my favorite characters, and like, they didn't even mention them. And I get it, this is supposed to be a sequel to base Persona 5 and not necessarily Persona 5 Royal, but there was no mention of these characters. And before any of you say, oh, but Akechi's dead, why would they bring him up? If you saw the ending to Persona 5 Royal, I think it was just in Royal, you see our boy may very well still be alive. But anyway, you had a lot of characters who came from Royal who just never got brought up. And I can deal with, Sojiro not playing a big part and like Takemi not being available. I get all that because we're on the road. We're not just hanging out in Shibuya the whole time. So I understand. But it would have been nice if they could have at least mentioned Sumire and Akechi. And this is one of the things that actually has me a little bit worried is this a true sequel? I know it's supposed to be, but it just feels empty without bringing up Sumire and Akechi. So character-wise, that would really be my only complaints. But now let's talk about the fun stuff. Let's start with the character Joker. Look, games that have a silent protagonist always have a challenge. How do you turn a character like this into something real? When he barely says anything, you choose all his dialogue options, and in the cutscenes, he's basically quiet and makes head nods. But they did it. And they actually did a better job of it, I think, in Strikers, as opposed to Persona 5 Royal, or the base game. I think they did a really good job of making Joker feel like a real character, feel a little more, I don't want to say real, but like feel a little bit more specific. Less general, more specific. And correct me if I'm wrong, let me know what you guys think. But I even saw it in the dialogue options. They seemed a little bit more specific and a little bit more expressive. And just the way the characters talk about Joker, it just seems like he's more established. He's not just that, blank slate character that he was in Persona 5. And there's nothing wrong with that. We end up loving characters like that. But I do like to see them evolve over time, especially when they get a direct sequel, to see that, oh, okay, something is becoming of this character. And there's, even though he's a silent protagonist per se, you can feel the chemistry between him and the other characters. Next, let's move on to Morgana. I mean, what's there to say? He's not bothering me to go to bed anymore, so now I like him infinitely more. Morgana's a great character. I know some people will give Morgana shit because he's not as funny as Teddy. But I love Morgana. I think he's a great character. I think they did a good job with him in Strikers, especially when they had to deal with the fact that, like, I don't want to say his arc was done, but he had a very, big arc in Persona 5 Royal. And let's just say his toughest days are behind him, but that didn't stop them from showing that he's grown. And this is a good job they do with all the characters. They show that they've grown. Like when Morgana and Ryuji bicker, it's a little bit more mature than it was in the previous game. And they lay off each other a little bit easier. So that was just cool to see. I like Morgana a lot. I was glad to see him fit into this game like a glove. What can I say? Great job. Let's move on to our boy Ryuji. Now, I loved Ryuji in the base game. Ryuji was my boy. He was my boy. But he's so funny in this fucking game. He is so funny. Like, again, without giving too much away, there's a cutscene where the Phantom Thieves order something and it gets delivered to them, and Ryuji just straight up has a panic attack and says they need to send it back. It just, I could pull out countless moments. Ryuji had me on the floor constantly. And the thing I loved about him the most, and this is what I mean when it comes to these characters, they showed how much they've grown, is, Ryuji showed himself to be very defensive. He's a very defensive guy. That's how he got himself in trouble with the track team. That's how he got himself in trouble with Kamoshida. He's very defensive. And we'll talk about Sophia soon, but my heart melted anytime Ryuji stood up for Sophia. It was beautiful. He's a great character who wears his heart on his sleeve, and you really, really felt it in Strikers. But now let's move on to An. An is a great character. I always really liked An, but I felt like she was really compromised by the beginning of Persona 5. And I guess what I mean by that is, if you notice, whether you're looking at Yusuke, Makoto, Futaba, Haru, they've all got a palace unto themselves, right? They've all got a palace unto themselves. An had to split her palace with Ryuji. And Ryuji's advantage is, we met him and got to run around with him before we got into that palace. Ryuji and Morgana kind of shared the tutorial palace, and then Ryuji and An sort of shared the Kamoshida's palace. But I felt like An having to share the spotlight with Ryuji when it came to Kamoshida kind of took away from her a little bit. Not a lot, but a little bit. I was happy to see that the first jail we went through was very on focus, and it shows how much she's grown. And this is something this game does very well with its story, is in the case like in this first jail, where you got, An has her parallel with Alice, who's the villain of the jail. You see that, and they do this, An and Alice came to the same fork in the road, but Alice went this way and An went that way. And you see that theme with all the jails, and those scenes really, really help a character. And they did a lot for An. I feel like I like An way more after playing Strikers, because it was good to see her matured and resolved, and see her be able to impart wisdom onto somebody else, which is great, because An's a bit of an airhead. It's why we love her, but she's a bit of an airhead. But to see her impart that wisdom onto somebody else was really refreshing to see. But now let's move on to everybody's favorite knucklehead, Yusuke. Yusuke was great in this game. I liked him better in Persona 5 because I felt like he was a lot funnier in Persona 5, and a lot of his jokes and a lot of his tropes were a lot more fresh then. But we could only make so many jokes about him not having money and being hungry. Persona 5 is a 120-hour game. We got plenty of those jokes. I wish they could have maybe mixed it up a little bit. Excuse me. But I thought they did a pretty good job with Yusuke. He was fun to play as. The jail that was focused on him was very good, because again, you had that same concept of him and the jail ruler were at the same fork in the road. One went this way, he went that way. And again, seeing him be able to impart that wisdom does a lot for a character. Now let's move on to Makoto, the boss of the gang. I love what they did with her here. I love that she, and I guess this is a personal thing, I love that she just wanted to drive the entire time, because I'm literally the same way. Anytime I'm on a road trip with my fiance or my friends, I just want to drive the whole time. I don't know what it is. It's just a tick I have. I don't know. But I thought that was very cool, because I felt like it was very fitting for her character. And again, even though Makoto didn't get a jail, and we'll talk about some of the new characters later, there's a character, Akane, and she's Zenkichi's daughter, and seeing Makoto be the big sister to Akane that she wished that Sai was to her was awesome. Because that's one thing I was afraid of. I was like, are we only going to be able to flesh out and pad on the characters who get a jail? And the answer to that was no. You got to see Makoto come into her own as a big sister. No more little sister Makoto. We got to see what it was like when she takes on that sort of big sister role. And there were so many great moments with her in this game. She's one of my favorite characters in Persona history. Loved Makoto. But now let's move on to Futaba. And this, man, it's tough. But I think Futaba might be I don't want to say improvement, but my favorite character to watch grow. Just because, you meet her in Persona 5, and let's just be honest, the girl's a wreck. She's an emotional wreck. She can't be in public. She doesn't know how to socialize with people. She's scared to just like be herself in many ways. But then in Strikers, like she's come to her own. Like she's funny. She's upbeat. She's not like shy anymore. Like don't get me wrong, she still freaks out in like big crowds and stuff like that. But you see like the strides that she's made, and it makes you so happy. And she's so charismatic now. Like when you're doing those missions where you have to protect her, and then when you wrap up the mission, she says something like, "Been a pleasure." I don't know. I'll edit in the voice line because I'm just gonna ruin it.
Ladies and gentlemen, your hack is now complete. Been a pleasure.
But anyway, it was just so fun to see this character who'd just been locked in her own shell completely break free. Next, we have Haru. Now, Haru, I love Haru. She's a great character, but she kind of bored me in Persona 5. Sorry for those of you who like big foreheads. Trust me, I got one, but she kind of bored me a little bit. She had a fun introduction, like when she teams up with Morgana, and she's like, I'm beauty thief and all of that. You know, that's all cool and all, but one of the things that Haru suffers from, and don't get me wrong, her confidant is great. I love her confidant. Honestly, it choked me up. But one of the things she suffers from is that she really doesn't show up until we're more than halfway done with the game. So she doesn't have a lot of time to interact with everybody and make those cool moments and memories. But this game really, I feel like they understood that. I feel like the developers or the writers, they knew Haru needed a little extra push. So without giving anything away too much, story-wise, when it comes to fleshing out her past and her character, they do a magnificent job. And I feel like I understand and am more attached to Haru than I was before. There's also a hilarious scene where we were talking about Makoto earlier, always wanting to drive. Haru takes the wheel at one point, and it's one of my favorite scenes in the whole game. But now, let's talk about some of these new characters. This is the more important stuff, I suppose. You know, we knew what to expect from the Phantom Thieves. We have some new characters worth talking about. Let's start with Zenkichi, baby. I love this guy. I swear I called it. From the first scene we saw him in, where he's got his feet kicked up on the table in the meeting, I'm like, that's a Phantom Thief. That's a Phantom Thief, baby. Without giving anything away, all I'm going to say is he does end up collaborating with the Phantom Thieves. Oh, I should warn, by the way. Big spoiler warning. This is where the spoilers are going to start rolling in now that we're talking about new characters. Really should have prefaced that one, Nick, but we're moving on. Zenkichi. Man, like, I don't know. Maybe it's me, because I don't know if you can tell by the beard. I'm a little bit older than your average Joe. I'm 29 years old now. And all the Phantom Thieves are 17, 18, 19, like that. Doesn't mean I can't relate to them. I most certainly do. Doesn't mean I can't connect to them. I most certainly do. But, like, I don't know. Zenkichi was a grown-ass man, and it was just kind of cool to have a character like that included in the crew. They all call him Gramps, which is funny, because, you know, I feel like a grandpa sometimes. I play slow-pitch softball on Sundays, so I got some old man in me already, even though I'm, you know, younger than 30. But anyway, enough about me. Back to Zenkichi. Zenkichi was fun. Zenkichi was funny. He's cool. And let's just say that I love a character who's tempted and has to fight temptations. And Zenkichi is definitely one of those characters. And, you know, I remember me and my fiance basically played this game alongside each other. She was very worried about where he was going to end up or how his story was going to end up. They do a good job of kind of making it a morality tug, an internal moral tug of war. And I came away loving Zenkichi. I hope we get to see more of him. Let's talk about his daughter, Akane. Akane's cool. She's not anything to write home about. She's fun. I think the fun thing about her is that she's like the biggest Phantom Thief fan, and she's like some Phantom Thief YouTuber. And, you know, I always love situations where the audience knows something the characters don't. And just to see her there doing her like little YouTube show about the Phantom Thieves while the Phantom Thieves are literally sitting in the room and she has no idea. It's stuff like that I really love. Akane was a cool character. She's very sweet. It was nice to see Makoto sort of guide her a little bit. And, you know, it's good. She did a lot for Zenkichi. It showed you what Zenkichi was fighting for. All in all, Kane was a great character. We didn't get a lot of her, but her place in the story was really nice. Okay, we got to talk about Sophia. We got to talk about Sophia. When I saw this character's design, I didn't really know what to think of it. It looked very goofy. Not that I have a problem with that. I'm a Kingdom Hearts fan, like literally goofy. But it looked fairly goofy. I wasn't sure how it was going to fit. It looked a little too cyber and too futuristic. But then you learn that she's like an AI on your phone. And then you go, oh, okay, now that sort of clicks. That sort of makes sense. And again, when you talk about tropes that I personally love, I love the trope of like you have a being like Sophia. She's an AI. She doesn't understand what it means to be human. And she spends the game understanding what it means to be human. And I guess the reason why I love this trope is because you got to ask yourself, why do you love stories? Why did you watch that movie 10 times? Why did you watch that show or that anime 3 times? Why did you buy the Persona 5 sequel? Why are you addicted to stories? Because I know I'm addicted to stories. Why are you addicted to stories? It's because at the end of the day, stories are about understanding what it means to be human. So in many ways, Sophia served as this perfect, I don't want to call her a plot device, it's not the right term, but this perfect vehicle for the story to flesh out what it means to be human. And honestly, I think my favorite scenes in the game are all with her. Every time you beat a jail and she bleeps your phone because she needs some clarification. Like I remember when you beat the second jail and Sophia, you know, she what would you say? She messages you and she's like, "Hey, so like Yusuke was really mad back there, but he cared about him. How does that work?" You know, it's little questions like that. Like, oh, you mean anger? You can use anger as a good thing? It doesn't always have to be like a bad condemning thing. You can use anger to snap someone out of something. It's just little stuff like that and the little conversations like that. It's like I feel like I'm learning something about myself when I'm listening to these Sophia cutscenes. And she was very easy to get attached to. You wanted nothing more but her happiness throughout the game, which is going to lead us into our next character, Ichinose, who, let me just say, this bitch is bonkers. This bitch is bonkers. But she several times had me laughing my ass off. I would have never seen what's coming. Again, I gave the spoiler warning, so I'm going to come out and say it. She essentially was a villain. She eventually turns to our side. But I got to admit, I'm not sure I saw that coming. I mean, I had my suspicions at first because I was like, why does she keep popping up? Why did she listen to those very particular voice lines that sort of give them away? I didn't quite see it coming. As we got closer to the end, I saw it coming. But for a lot of the game, I did not see it coming. And there was one scene in particular that stuck with me. Now, if you guys recall, when you're shopping in Sophia's shop, if you leave the menu idle, Sophia hums a tune. And it goes something like... And then when we get to a part with Ichinose and we flash back to her and we see her as she's programming Sophia, she's humming that same tune. And that fucked with me. That fucked with me. Because Ichinose, as we know, she hollowed herself out. She pretty much had a cold heart, turned away from everything that made her human. And then you realize Sophia is that part of her that really longed for that really longed to have a heart. Hence, you know, the hearts and all the heart detail and heart motifs on Sophia's design. It was moving. It was moving because, you know, we all have people in our lives who go through a lot of shit and, you know, you feel like they've been through so much that they kind of just cut themselves off from emotion or cut themselves off from companionship. Like, I don't know if you guys have any friends or if you yourselves have been in like such a bad breakup that you're like, well, what's even the point? Why am I going to potentially set myself up for this horror again? You know, we've all either seen that or we've all either been there. And it makes a character like Ichinose very real, and it hurts all the more when it's a character like Ichinose who's so talented and chipper and, you know, cute. And it's just like, nah, she's living a horror story. It was a great turn. It was a great part of the game. She's a great character. I hope we see her back. But now, let's move on to the next character. Akira Konoe, the villain. This was interesting. Because like, you can't tell me that this wasn't just evil Iron Man. Like, that's who this is. This is like evil Iron Man with a really bad Batman twist, where instead of just the parents dying, it's, your father killed your mother, and then you killed your father. Like, what a backstory, man. And, I really appreciate when games take the extra time to flesh out their villains, so it's not like, oh, I'm evil just cause. I'm a villain because I want power, or, I have a lust for power. I got one little taste and now I'm addicted. I like it when, when characters like Konoe just always kind of were this way out of necessity. Like when it's a survival thing. Like being this way is the only way Konoe knew. He was a very good villain, not as good as Shido. I felt he was a little bit lacking. The whole Zephyr Man trope was a little I don't know. He was a good character, but he didn't carry a lot of weight for me. Not the kind of weight that Shido carried. But let's move on to the real villain here, Emma. Everyone, you should have seen this one coming. Not anything to write home about again. You got another, like, false god. Another hubris program trying to do its thing that you got to stop. It was cool, but this is, again, where I feel like the story falls flat a little bit. Because it's like, hey, I feel like I've seen all of this before. I feel like I saw all of this coming. Whereas with especially Persona 5 Royal, there were a lot of things I didn't see coming that they took me by surprise. But the whole thing with Emma, while cool, again, in my opinion, wasn't anything to write home about. But look, let's wrap this up. What do you say? Let's round this out. So, all in all, let's answer the question. Persona 5 Strikers, worthy sequel or lousy spinoff? Well, I definitely wouldn't agree with lousy spinoff. I think lousy is too strong of a word. As of today, I'm calling it a worthy sequel. But it's a very key point. It's a very, very key point. This cannot be the last game in the Persona 5 story. If this is the last game in the Persona 5 story, I think it's a little weak. And that's my opinion. Because I think Persona 5 and Persona 5 Royal are so strong that if this is supposed to be some kind of finale for their story, it doesn't work. However, they've said 1,000,000 times at the end of the game, like, we'll be back. We'll see you again. I'm sure we'll see you again. Like, there was a lot of implications that there's gonna be a third installment. So I will say, under the pretenses that there is a third installment, this is most definitely a worthy sequel. Now, if this is where the Persona 5 story ends, I won't call it a lousy spinoff, but I'll call it an average spinoff. So, if this is where the story ends, average spinoff. If there's a continuation, definitely a worthy sequel. I know it's not the most cut and dry answer, but to come out with it, I really liked this game. I really, really, really did. And I'm going to measure it on the same... I'm not big on giving things a score, but I feel like you have to, just so the audience knows where you stand, and I know where I stand. Look, Persona 5 Royal to me, I can't give a game a 10 out of 10, but that's a 9.9 out of 10. Maybe 9.8. 9.9, 9.8 out of 10 Persona 5 Royal. Seriously, I believe that it's one of, if not my favorite game of all time. Persona 5 Strikers, I'm going to give a 7.5. A very solid 7.5. On a good day, an 8. But overall, I'm going to give it a 7.5, measuring it on the same scale of Persona 5. If I'm measuring this as like just a game, like pretend Persona 5 doesn't exist, this is an 8.5. That's the thing. That's the thing about my review here. I'm reviewing it on the scale of Persona 5. And on the scale of Persona 5, this is a 7.5. I'm really hoping that there's another installment to this story. It seems like that's what they were setting up. Otherwise, what was that Akechi post-credits cutscene for in Persona 5 Royal? So, I think there's going to be a third installment. They've made so many implications about the third installment. I'll be looking forward to it. Persona 5 Strikers is a very, very worthy play. If you are a fan of Persona 5, you are going to love this game. I really enjoyed this game. Very solid, lots of fun, amazing soundtrack, great memories. All in all, a solid Persona experience. However, Atlas, there better be a finale. But that's going to be all for me today, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening to me rant for 30 plus minutes. I don't know how you do it. I don't know how I do it. But thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Landy Lodge, and I will see all of you beautiful sickos and normies next time.